She was always there. No matter how busy her day was, no matter how tired she felt, she always made time for him. A quick reply, a late-night call, a last-minute favor he never had to ask twice. She listened when he vented, supported him when things got tough, and showed up even when he barely acknowledged her efforts. It wasn't that he didn't care, at least. That's what she told herself. He was just distracted, focused on his own world, assuming she would always be in the background, waiting. But she wasn't waiting. Not really. At first, she told herself that being there for him was enough, that he'd notice eventually, that one day he'd see what she saw so clearly, that they were supposed to matter to each other in a way that went beyond convenience. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and nothing changed. She was always the one reaching out first, always the one adjusting her schedule, making sacrifices, filling in the gaps when he was too busy. And then, one day, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No big argument, no sudden realization. It was just a quiet, undeniable truth settling in her chest. She was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. She had poured so much of herself into someone who never thought to do the same for her. And the worst part, he didn't even realize it. So, for the first time in a long time, she didn't answer his message right away. She didn't rearrange her plans to match his. She didn't drop everything the moment he called. And just like that, the balance changed. She started focusing on herself, on the things she had put aside, the passions she had ignored, the dreams she had delayed for too long. She filled her time with new experiences, met new people, and stopped looking at her phone, waiting for his name to appear. And he noticed. At first, he thought it was just bad timing, that she was busy, but would eventually find her way back to him like she always did. But then, the messages went unanswered a little longer. The calls started feeling different. The girl who had always been available, the one who made him feel important, without him ever having to try, wasn't there anymore for the first time. He had to wonder, had he lost her? Or worse, had she finally realized she never needed him in the first place? He didn't think much of it at first. People got busy, schedules clashed, it was normal. He figured she'd get back to him when she had a free moment, just like always. But as the hours turned into days, something felt off. She wasn't ignoring him exactly, but there was a shift. The usual eagerness in her messages was gone, replaced with something more distant. Shorter replies, less effort, conversations that used to flow easily now ending before they even really began. He brushed it off. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe something else was occupying her time. Still, a nagging feeling settled in the back of his mind, one he couldn't quite shake. He told himself that if she really needed space, that was fine. But deep down, he had never considered the possibility that space meant she might not come back. Meanwhile, she was learning what it felt like to put herself first. It was uncomfortable at first, a strange kind of guilt sitting in her chest when she didn't immediately respond to him. But the more she focused on herself, the lighter she felt. She started spending time with people who truly saw her, who valued her presence instead of just expecting it. She picked up hobbies she had forgotten about, threw herself into work, and let herself enjoy moments without constantly wondering if he needed her. And slowly, she realized something. She wasn't missing him as much as she thought she would. He, on the other hand, was starting to notice things he had taken for granted. The random check-ins that made his day a little easier. The quiet encouragement when things weren't going right. The simple, steady presence of someone who made him feel like he mattered, even when he put in no effort at all. It wasn't until it was gone that he realized just how much he had leaned on it. He sent a message, one he thought would bring things back to normal. A casual, familiar joke, something that would usually make her smile. But this time, her response was polite, distant. Not rude, not cold, just different. And that's when it hit him. She was slipping away. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. If he wanted her attention, he'd get it back. He always had before. So he reached out again, this time with more effort. Asked about her day, tried to bring up things she had always been excited to share with him. But she didn't rush to answer. When she did, she wasn't rude, but she wasn't the same either for the first time. He was the one left waiting, and she was finally realizing that she had spent too much time waiting for someone who never truly saw her. Now she was the one moving forward, and for the first time, she wasn't looking back. He didn't understand it, this distance between them. It wasn't like they had fought. There had been no dramatic falling out, no harsh words exchanged. But somehow, she was slipping further and further away, and he had no idea how to stop it. He told himself he wasn't worried, that if he gave it time, things would go back to normal. But time passed, and nothing changed. She wasn't avoiding him outright, but she also wasn't making space for him the way she used to. It was in the small things, how she no longer checked in first, how she didn't send him things that reminded her of their inside jokes, how she no longer asked if he needed anything when she knew he was having a rough day. For the first time, he was the one left wondering, waiting, feeling like an afterthought. Meanwhile, she was beginning to see her world differently. The space she had once filled with him was now open, and she was finally realizing how much she had been missing out on. She wasn't lonely, like she had feared. If anything, she felt lighter, free in a way she hadn't in a long time. She laughed more, stayed out later, let herself exist without constantly thinking about what he might need. And the more she embraced it, the more she wondered why she had ever let herself be so consumed by someone who never gave her the same energy in return. But that didn't mean it was easy. There were moments when the habit of reaching for her phone almost won. Moments when she had to remind herself that she wasn't responsible for making sure he was okay. She had spent so long caring for him, supporting him, being there without question. Letting go of that instinct wasn't simple. And then, just when she thought she had fully moved forward, he reached out in a way he never had before. He asked to see her. Not in the casual way he used to, not with the expectation that she would say yes just because she always had. This time, he asked like someone who knew the answer might be no. Like someone who realized he no longer had the same hold over her. She hesitated. A few months ago, she would have dropped everything. But now? Now she wasn't sure if she wanted to open that door again. Still, curiosity won over. She agreed, but on her terms. A time that fit her schedule, a place she felt comfortable with. And when she finally saw him again, she noticed something she hadn't before. He looked unsure. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. He wasn't the one dictating how things went. And as he looked at her, at the way she carried herself now, at the quiet confidence that came with knowing she no longer needed him, she saw something flicker across his face: regret. And that's when she knew. He finally understood. He finally saw her, not as the person who would always be there, but as the one who had learned how to live without him. He sat across from her, watching, searching for the version of her he had always known, the one who was eager to listen, who laughed easily, who made him feel like he was the most important person in the room. But she wasn't that girl anymore. At least not with him. She was calm, composed, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. And it unsettled him. He had never had to fight for her attention, never had to wonder if she was invested in their conversations. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was speaking to someone who had already moved on. He tried to start with something familiar, something safe. A joke, a memory, a casual remark, meant to break the ice. She smiled, polite but detached, and that smile sent a wave of unease through him. It wasn't the kind that reached her eyes, the kind that made him feel like she was fully present. It was the kind people gave when they were ready to walk away. Panic flickered inside him. He had expected some hesitation, maybe even some frustration, but not this. Not this quiet, certain distance. "You've been busy," he said, as if it were just an observation. "I have," she answered simply, not offering any more than that. He cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "I feel like I haven't seen you in forever." She tilted her head slightly, considering. You haven't. The directness of her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't trying to be cruel, but she also wasn't making it easier for him. She had nothing to prove to him anymore, and that terrified him. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice like he was trying to pull her back into the familiarity of what they used to be. Did I do something? The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of all the things that had gone unsaid. She met his gaze, steady and unreadable. "You didn't do anything." That was the problem. His stomach dropped. She didn't say it with anger. There was no bitterness in her voice, no resentment in her expression, just quiet honesty. And that was worse than anything else. He opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Because deep down, he knew she was right. And worse, he knew it might be too late to change anything. He sat there, stunned, as her words settled between them like a weight he couldn't lift. "You didn't do anything." That was the problem. It echoed in his mind, louder than the noise of the calf, louder than his own thoughts scrambling for a response. She wasn't angry. That's what made it worse. If she had been furious, if she had thrown accusations, he could have defended himself, explained, done something. But this was different. This was final in a way he hadn't been prepared for. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know you felt that way." She let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, but not the kind he wanted to hear. That's the point. The realization hit him like a slow-moving train, crushing, inescapable. He had always assumed she was fine, that she was happy just being there, that she didn't need more than what he gave. But now, looking at her calm, distant, untouchable, he understood. She had needed more, and he had never thought to ask. A sharp sting of regret twisted in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was regret for how things had turned out, or regret that he had been so blind to see it happening in the first place. Before he could figure out what to say next, she glanced at her phone. "I should go," she said, already gathering her things. Panic shot through him. "Wait." He reached for something, anything to make her stay. "I don't want this to be the last time we talk." She paused, studying him for a moment. Then, with a small, unreadable smile, she said, "That's up to you." And just like that, she was gone. He sat there long after she had left, staring at the empty seat across from him, trying to make sense of what had just happened. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. He wasn't the one dictating how things would go. And worse, he wasn't sure if he still had a chance to fix it. But then, just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. A message. But not from her. As he read it, his chest tightened. It was something he never expected, something that could change everything. And suddenly, he realized this wasn't just about her pulling away anymore. There was something else. Something he didn't see coming. His heart pounded as he stared at the message on his phone. The sender's name made his stomach tighten, and for a moment, he hesitated before opening it. "We need to talk. It's important." It wasn't from her. It was from someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time, someone connected to both of them, in ways that suddenly felt more significant than ever. A mix of confusion and unease settled over him as he stood up from the caf table, his mind racing. He had spent so much time thinking about what he had lost with her, about the slow unraveling of what they once had, that he hadn't even considered the possibility of something bigger happening in the background. He stepped outside, the cool air hitting his face as he dialed the number. The phone barely rang before it was answered. "I didn't think you'd pick up," the voice said, cautious, uncertain. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. There was a pause. Then, a quiet sigh. "It's about her." His grip tightened around the phone. "What about her?" "She's leaving." The words hit him harder than expected. His breath caught in his throat. What do you mean, leaving? She got an offer, a big one. She's moving. Soon. He felt the ground shift beneath him. He had spent all this time trying to understand the distance between them, trying to figure out if he still had a chance to fix things. But now, that chance was slipping away faster than he could grasp it. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration and panic swirling inside him. Why didn't she tell me? Another pause. Then the voice on the other end said something that made his chest tighten even more. Maybe because she didn't think it would change anything, the truth stung. She had already made up her mind. And why wouldn't she? He had given her every reason to believe that he wouldn't fight for her, that he would only care once she was gone, but he wasn't ready to let her go. Not like this without thinking. He was already moving, already trying to figure out where she was, how much time he had left. He needed to see her, needed to say something before it was too late, and then, just as he was about to leave, another thought hit him. What if this wasn't just about him realizing what he had lost? What if she had known all along that he would only wake up when there was nothing left to hold on to, and what if she didn't want to be fought for anymore? He stood frozen, the weight of everything pressing down on him. She was leaving. The words echoed in his mind, louder than anything else. He had spent so much time taking her presence for granted, assuming she would always be there, that he never once considered a world where she wasn't. And now, she was slipping away, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because she had finally chosen herself. His first instinct was to run to her, to say something, anything that might make her stay. But then, the nagging thought returned. What if she doesn't want to be fought for anymore? She had given him so many chances before. Silent ones. Moments where she had hoped he would notice, that he would show her she mattered just as much as everything else in his life. But he hadn't. And now, when she had finally stepped away, when she had learned to be happy on her own, was it fair for him to try to pull her back? He didn't know what to do. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a plan, didn't have the upper hand. All he had was the truth staring him in the face. He had lost her long before she ever decided to leave. But still, he had to see her, even if it changed nothing. Even if she had already made up her mind. He needed to at least try. The drive to her place felt both too long and too short. He barely remembered the turns, barely registered the lights flashing past him. By the time he reached her building, his hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. For a moment, he just sat there. His heart was racing, his breath uneven. He wasn't sure if he was more afraid of seeing her or of what she might say. But he had already wasted enough time. When he knocked on her door, he half expected her not to answer. Maybe she already knew why he was here. Maybe she didn't want to hear it. But after a pause, the door opened and there she was. She looked surprised to see him, but not shocked. Like a part of her had been waiting for this. Like she knew it would come, but it didn't change anything. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. She nodded, studying him for a moment. "Hey." He swallowed, trying to find the right words. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment looked different. Some boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, signs of someone preparing for a new chapter. His stomach tightened at the sight. This was real. She really was leaving. She sat down on the couch, and he followed, feeling more like a stranger in her space than he ever had before. There was no warmth, no easy comfort between them. Just the quiet understanding that they had both changed, and there was no undoing it. "I heard you're moving," he said, watching her closely. She nodded. "I am." He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "Why didn't you tell me?" She tilted her head slightly, considering her words. Would it have changed anything? The question hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that if she had told him sooner, he would have done something. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had spent too long assuming she would always be there. And now, when she had finally chosen a path without him, he wasn't sure if he had the right to ask her to stay. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I wish you had." She gave him a small, sad smile. "I did. Maybe not in words. But I did." And that was when it really sank in. She had told him through every unanswered silence, through every time she stopped trying, through every moment she had pulled away, little by little. He just hadn't been listening. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't want you to go." She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. Why? The question shouldn't have been so hard to answer, but it was. Because for the first time, he had to be honest, not just with her, but with himself. "Because I was wrong," he said finally. "I thought you'd always be there. I thought I had time. But I didn't see what I was doing to you. I didn't see how much I took you for granted. And I hate that it took losing you to understand what I had." She didn't say anything for a long time. And that silence felt heavier than anything else. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "I'm happy now." His heart clenched. Not because he didn't want her to be happy, but because she had found happiness without him. She exhaled slowly. "For so long, I waited for you to see me. I kept hoping you'd realize I wasn't just there. But I got tired of waiting. And when I finally let go, I found something better. I found me." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw it. The peace in her eyes, the weight that had lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't bitter, she wasn't angry. She had simply outgrown him. And that was when he realized this wasn't a fight he was supposed to win. He could have begged, could have asked for another chance, but that wouldn't have been fair. She had given him so many chances already. This time, it was his turn to let her go. So instead, he nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm glad you're happy." A flicker of something passed through her eyes, maybe relief, maybe understanding. "I hope you will be too." And that was it. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic last-minute decision. Just two people who had once meant everything to each other, realizing that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together. He left that night knowing he couldn't change the past. But maybe, just maybe, he could learn from it. And as he walked away, he finally understood what she had known all along. Some things aren't meant to last forever. And sometimes, letting go is the only way to truly move forward.